Hi, and welcome to RCKicks. On today's show, well, we're just having a chat. Basically, we've come to the summertime in the UK and the kids have broken up from holidays and things tend to get quite quiet. Racing's finished for a while. And when I mean racing's finished, I mean indoor racing. Everybody's gone outdoor racing. It's summer in the UK. Rain, grass, dirt and mud all slung up inside the car every time you take it out, and the hours of cleaning that then unfolds is just not me. Yes, I am a fair weather driver. That's why I love indoor carpet racing. You go racing, you drive your car, you dust it down a little bit of fluff on it. Apart from that, it's ready to go again, and that just suits me. So I'm taking a little bit of time off to spend with the family, as I've been doing this now for 4.5 years, and I've taken probably 2 weeks holiday in that time. So I thought now would be a good time to just sit down and have a chat and talk about some subjects that are a little bit controversial, you know, get people talking and discussing things. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the release of the RC10 DS from Team Associated. Now, I didn't know about this one and I'm quite interested in it. Now, the thing that worries me is it going to be like the RC10T? In the UK, we basically haven't seen hardly any of them, and the ones that are kind of floating around on eBay have been imported directly from America and people trying to profiteer from it. So are we going to see the same from the RC10 DS? I hope not, as I really want to add one of those to the collection, as it's very different. I like the way that it uses the RC10 alloy chassis, but one I never even knew existed. So something a little bit different, and as I do a lot of buggies, it's quite nice to have something a little bit different on the show. But I'll try and get one. Honestly, don't know whether I can. Now, I can order it direct, and I get the feeling this is exactly what they want you to do. The problem is, I went and I looked at the prices, and I can get it for $369.99 in US dollars. Shipping to the UK by Team Associated is $53.87, giving me a total price of $423.86. In pounds, that's £328.70. Now, when you do that, import into the UK, you've got to pay 20% tax on the price of the product itself and the shipping cost on top of that. That gives me a total of £394.44. Also, we get charged a £12 handling fee when you bring stuff in, because they can. So that gives us a grand total of £406.44. Now in dollars, that's $523.86. Yes, so buying a $369 product is going to cost $523.86 in the UK. You can see why this is a little bit expensive. Also, it makes no logical sense that basically Team Associated want you to import every kit individually. It must be cheaper to actually supply them to the distributions in the countries and then they sell them, as it's much cheaper to put them in one great big shipping container versus posting them out individually. So I did put a comment on CML's website. They are the distributor for Team Associated in the UK, asking, are they going to actually get the RC10 DS, or is it going to be like the RC10T? So I've got some good news from CML from the RC10 DS. Yes, they will be getting them in the UK, so we should be able to get some. So that's fantastic news, and I'll definitely be getting one on the show when I can. Also, the Team Associated have dropped a drift car as well. So they're banging out kits pretty fast, but they don't seem to be actually distributing them very well, which is really weird. Isn't it better to distribute 2 kits really well and get all those unit sales versus bang out 5 and only get half the people that wanted it couldn't get it, and then they're not supporting any parts for it? So really they're just shelf queens, and unless you can get hold of parts from third-party distributors. And then there was that whole thing about them posting saying that they're not, you know, the lawyer aspect of it, that they're thinking about trying to go after some people about their branding and stuff, which is all very reminiscence of what Traxxas did, which doesn't go down very well in our hobby at all, because if you're a business and you're not supporting your customers with parts and someone else decides to do it for you, well, that's your own lookout, right? But obviously in America, this is very different. So yeah, Team Associated, love some of their products. They're amazing. Their B6.4, their B7 that I still haven't built on the show is amazing. I know it had a few issues, but it's still an amazing buggy, as well as a lot of their vintage stuff is gorgeous. And I love that they're bringing out a lot of their vintage stuff. They're just not really doing a great job of it. But this is not Team Associated. This is definitely Thunder Tiger. Thunder Tiger controls, obviously they own AE, and they basically control everything. You know, they've got control of all the websites, the rollouts, the product, the manufacturing, all sides of it is controlled by them. So really this all comes down to whatever they're trying to do, but I don't really, from a business point of view, understand what they're trying to achieve. Anyway, we'll just have to wait and see how things unfold. I would love to get an RC10T on the show to build it up and add it to the collection, but as of today, I can't get hold of one. So whether I'll end up trying to buy one off eBay, I don't like paying well over the odds for it. It's just stupid where someone has grabbed it, imported it, and then just whacked an extra £300 on top of it. That just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So whether I can get one at a normal price, if I can, I'll put it on the show. Got some good news about the RC10T. Paul, one of the Patreons for RCKicks, contacted me and said I could buy his kit off him for a very reasonable price. So I am double thumbs up, excited to be able to get an RC10T finally on the show and into the collection. Massive thanks, Paul. So let's talk about Tamiya for a while, as it's been kind of quiet, but there's been quite a few things that have been going on in the background. Now, from their releases aspect, yes, there's been a few little gems kind of hidden in there. The XM-01 Pro little rally car looks pretty cool. Not sure why I never got one of those on the show. I think I've just been quite busy, but maybe I'll add one of those later on down the line. Then there's been a lot of really nice bodies released on TTO2, but it's been reasonably quiet. That's why I haven't really been rushing to build new release kits, as there hasn't really been a great deal that's grabbed my attention. A lot of the things I've been doing, I did the Durga from Tamiya. That was obviously a very old kit. And also I'm about to do the Daytona Thunder, but these are old vintage kits. But as for new things, nothing's really grabbing me at the moment. Now, there has been some news over the last week of the Evo Hornet. That's under kit 58752. Now, this is going to retail for £195 in the UK, and a normal Hornet is about £105. But you do get more in the Evo kit. So before you go, it's double the price or £90 dearer. Yeah, you get bearings. You also get a motor and an ESC. If you want to get an ESC with a Hornet, you're going to pay an extra tenner, I think it is. So that's £115. So it is a little bit of a step up. And when it first came out, I wasn't overly sold. I think a lot of it came from when I posted that this news is out and I wasn't overly excited about it, was because we've been waiting for quite a long time for a hero car from Tamiya. It's really disappointing that we're not seeing anything. But then someone else commented about why that is, and yeah, it made me stop and think a bit more about it. And obviously thinking about the Evo over the last few days, I've kind of changed my opinion on it. Personally, I love the Hornet. I think it was a brilliant, iconic vintage car. So for them to adapt it and modify it and fix a lot of those weaknesses in it, like the whole suspension, the diff, you know, having independent suspension instead of like huge great big axle on the back of it, these are all actually really good things. At first I didn't think they'd change much, but they've actually gone back and they've polished quite a few things. Now, I think it's going to be difficult to get the suspension working well because the car is so light, but hopefully with a little bit of fettling it'll actually perform really well. Not that I would recommend getting a Tamiya Hornet Evo to go racing. Yeah, I'm still upsetting a lot of Tamiya fans, I know. So definitely going to get one on the show if you can get them in any numbers, and I'll add that to my collection and take it for a bit of a run. Maybe I'll get both of them and we'll do a comparison between the two. I don't know, but we'll see. Depends on availability and when they're going to come out. But overall, I now think actually it's a really good idea. I think they're going to sell bucket loads. I just think that it is a slightly different strategy for Tamiya to take a car and then upgrade it. We have normally what we've tend to see over the last few years with RLRs, they just bring them out with their flaws. So this is a bit of a change of tactics. So hopefully, maybe we'll see this down the line. Now for collectors, I think collectors like it as well, because if they've got the original one, it's like you would buy that one to add it to your collection, as it's different enough to kind of complement the original car instead of just re-reing it. The only thing that I'm not sold on with the Hornet Evo is the decals, but that's a personal choice. Now another big one for Tamiya is obviously they've changed the president. Now they've got a new president called Nobuo. Sorry, I'm butchering his name. Tamiya. So obviously he's related to the family. Nepotism is never a good thing, and this is obviously something you see in Japan quite a lot. And I've worked for a lot of I've worked for a Japanese company for a long time. Doesn't fill me full of confidence, as you promote people based on who they are, not their competence level. And with Japanese companies, this tends to happen because it's not like an American company or an English company. You're employed from when you're young and you stay with the company, and you're promoted mainly due to years of service, not necessarily if you're actually any good. So you can end up with a big department head who is absolutely useless, but because he's been there a long time, when the slot comes available, they move him into it. And this is never a good thing. Another side of it is obviously the more senior someone is, if they've been in Japan totally and they've never traveled much, or they never lived outside of Japan, being that Japan is a very different country to a lot of others, it doesn't really give them a very good business understanding for a global market. Now, I've seen some comments that have been put out and some statements, and again, it kind of backs up my feelings that very much looking at the local domestic market. Now, obviously, Tamiya is not just an RC company, they're a plastic manufacturer, and a lot of them are kit orientated, and that's a massive part of their business. So to give them the benefit of the doubt, will things change? Well, probably slowly over a longer period, but don't expect any massive changes or suddenly them being really on point with releasing a lot of their vintage stuff. The only thing that kind of lends me towards the idea that they may realize this, as Kyosho had an amazing last 2 years banging out all their 60th anniversary kits, and that would probably get their attention more from a strategy point of view than their customers screaming at them about what they want. They don't tend to really listen to what customers want. It tends to be more an internal domestic market kind of way of doing things, and what their competitors are doing. So if they see their competitors doing something and it's going very well, they'll tend to jump and copy it, as that's a very safe move for them to do. As it, obviously a Japanese business, it's very risk averse. There's no one wants to stick their neck out and fail at a project, as that's a really bad thing. More people would rather not say anything, as it's a safer business way to work. Obviously, if you've never worked for a Japanese company, this all sounds a bit weird, but that's kind of how it works. Another aspect with Tamiya, which I'm hoping is true, is someone commented that next year is the 50th anniversary for Tamiya. So are we seeing less releases in 2024 from Tamiya, as they're really gearing up to release some blinders in 2025? I hope so. I really do. You would think it's going to take quite a bit of preparation to be able to drop kits on your 50th anniversary, and you want them to be reasonably special. Now, I'm hoping this is the case, going on what I said before about Kyosho had a blinding anniversary releases for themselves, so they're going to copy that kind of strategy. What we'll see? Well, I think we've all been talking about it for years. Whether we actually will see it or not, the Porsche 959 Street, honestly, can't really see him doing it. Why? Because that's what everybody wants, and Tamiya doesn't do what everybody wants. They do whatever they want. And hopefully, maybe whatever they decide to do is still really cool. Whether it's going to be a Dynastorm or not, who knows? and we've covered this a million times. We've just got to wait and see what random stuff Tamiya decide to drop, and pray it's really cool and it's what everybody's looking for. One thing that's definitely a big plus for Tamiya is they've reopened a larger and more modern looking store in Tokyo. This is a really good move for them to advance their look and feel and brand and make it more modern. Unfortunately though, don't hold your breath. We're not exactly going to be seeing any other Tamiya stores appearing in Europe or America. I don't think this is something they're looking to roll out sort of on a global scale. And I must admit, I am still really surprised that we don't have Tamiya in Europe themselves and they just rely on a distributor. I know in America there is a Tamiya America, and again you'd think that would have grown and become a store or something like that. As I don't know. Comment below, let me know. Do you think Tamiya should really be in Europe itself and being more active in America as well? Growing, putting in stores. If Tamiya dropped a store in London or somewhere in America, do you think that would be a good move? Comment below, let me know. As for Schumacher Racing, well, it's all quiet on their vintage front at the moment, but as we move closer to Christmas, it would logically make sense that they're going to drop a vintage kit or two leading up to Christmas, as that would be the optimal time, and we haven't seen much from them for quite a while. So what will we see? Boss Cat maybe? Honestly, don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But at the moment, it's all quiet on the vintage front from Schumacher Racing. As for Kyosho, well, they've been doing really well in the last couple of years, so I think they've kind of really understand how successful some of their vintage stuff is. Now we've got the Kyosho Optima Pro is due to be released any day now or in the next couple of weeks. Definitely getting one of those on the show. Really love it. Good looking buggy. Love the body. Love the under tray. The under tray is really cool. I didn't realize it had all those aero kind of cut into it. That's really interesting. Not sold on the whole woody look with the brown stickers, so maybe we'll change it into a different color. I do like the yellow, so maybe I'll lose it yellow and then just change the stickers from MTI or something. We'll just have to wait and see, but I do plan on getting one of those on the show as well. So hopefully over the next year or so they'll keep doing this and releasing their kits, their vintage stuff. The only thing that worries me a little bit is there seems to be a lot of their pro kits around the Kyosho prototype. You can still pick those up everywhere. You can still pick up the mids everywhere. The only one that was really rare and disappeared was the CRC2. They were long gone, but the other kits are still around, and hopefully that hasn't been seen as a negative aspect to Kyosho to stop them from doing future releases, as everybody is screaming to see the Tom's Turbo Optima Mid Special, and hopefully we'll see that in the next year or two. As for Team Losi, well, they're still miniaturizing everything down and making smaller and smaller RCs. But when I say Team Losi drop lots of minis, well, they kind of do, but they also drop the massive cars. They seem to have loads of mini Bs and loads of huge, great big scale cars. They've just dropped the 1.6 Laser Nut, and that looks pretty impressive. But the funny thing is, when you go and look on their website, they've got no 1/10 electric racing buggies, but they've got loads of mini B racing buggies. So this really shows just where Team Losi are focusing on their massive scale and their little mini ones, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of 1/10. That doesn't mean though I don't like the idea of getting a 1.6 Laser Nut. Oh yeah, that would be cool. So from their vintage, they're not really doing anything, so we don't really expect to see any kind of change in their strategy of going back and doing any vintage 1/10s, which again is a total mistake. But hey, that's their board of directors. They don't want to, you know, they're not interested in doing what everybody else is doing in the field, and they're happy to leave that money on the table. So in the flip side, that you could argue that means that their vintage cars are going up in price because there is no re-releases. So I guess if you own those expensive cars already, you're going to be kind of more happy that that's happening. Whereas if you're trying to collect them, or you'd like to experience building a new in-box vintage Team Losi car, you're not really going to get the experience. So it kind of is what it is, I guess. Another one is Yokomo. Now we know we're going to be getting the early Super Dogfighter, which is the YZ-834 B. Now, this is really good to see, but quite surprising that they actually went backwards in time, not forwards, as a lot of people want to see the YZ10s, the 94s, that kind of stuff. And I'm pretty sure we will get them, but this is a bold move going back that far, as back then cars were evolving quite a lot, and it's only a dual shock system, so not very good for racing. Very heavy, very different. Not the most pretty looking car either. So I'm not sure if this one's going to be a massive home run as much as if they'd have gone a little bit more forward in time. Hopefully it does do really well and it doesn't put them off producing the later cars, as that's what the ones that I think a lot of people are really looking for. I haven't decided whether I'm going to get one on the show. It's a little bit old-fashioned style that I don't think you could take it vintage racing really, so it's just going to be a shelf queen, which obviously suits my style because I have a lot of shelf queens. But whether it's going to sell a lot of units, comment below, let me know. Do you think it was a good move by Yokomo to go backwards instead of forwards, and are you going to get one? As for the channel, well, just give you some heads up of what's coming down the line. Obviously, we plan to keep ramping up towards Christmas, as that's the really busy time. So after the summer holidays and all the kids go back, that's when things usually start to pick up. So hopefully we'll be able to start pushing and making a lot more content for you. Currently in the wings, apart from a load of half-finished projects that I've still got to do, the Kyosho Optima Pro, yeah, the RC10T if I can get it, the RC10DS if I can get it, Hornet Evo, definitely. I've got my team associated B7. Yes, I've had that for like 6 months now, but it's finally getting towards the top to be built. As my race buggies, I'm pretty much there with them now. The Durga is going to be raffled off, and that will be finishing in the next 10 days or so. If you're interested in getting the Durga, having a chance at winning it, I'll put a link in the description. Go check that out. So from the racing side of things, the B7 will be coming out, and that will be going into the Noob Goes Racing. Another side of it, which I'm going to be doing as well, and I've been looking around to try and find the right parts, is I'm going to do going racing on a budget. So I'm going to try and build the best budget racing buggy, second-hand aspects to it that I can, and my son is going to go racing with me. So that's the idea. So there'll be a whole load of videos on finding used parts, used cars, building up a buggy that's the best I can for the least amount of money, and then he's going to race it, and then we'll follow him along, that kind of stuff. So that's going to be another series that's kind of coming. RCKicks Grand Tour, still plodding along. It's gone a bit quiet at the moment as funds have kind of stopped. I've got some funds for the van, but it's still not quite enough to cover things like, well, the van is a few thousand more than that, so I need to keep bringing in probably another 3,000 or so before I can actually jump on the van. Looking like, realistically, probably I'm tempted maybe to start in spring of next year, as I don't just want to go out and buy the cheapest rubbish van and have loads of trouble with it and it breaking down. And so I'd rather take my time and get the right van, and because I'm going to be driving all over the UK in it and I don't want to get a wreck. So I'll probably hold off a little bit. Van prices are starting to come down a little bit, so hopefully we'll meet in the middle and I'll get something that's reliable. Right now, you're looking at vans that are over 100,000 miles just about I can get, or more than that. And really, I don't really want to get a small tiny van which has basically got a car engine that's already at 100,000 miles, but I do plan to keep doing that. But realistically, it will probably more like going into 2025 where I'll be geared up. I'll keep pushing forward with the project, and I'll do some updates as I go to be ready for spring maybe, and then we'll do the whole of 2025 doing that. We'll see, but I'll keep you posted on it. It's purely down into the financial aspects, but definitely want to do it, so we'll just have to wait and see. Things cost more money: insurance, fuel, maintenance, vehicle itself, the tax, all that kind of stuff all costs money. And don't forget, everything I earn for the channel I have to pay tax on myself, which is 20%. As for the Traxxas Max / walking challenge, yep, still doing it in the background. I haven't really filmed anything. I've just been off walking and stuff like that. It's just going to take a long time to do that. Some people did comment about the security aspect of it as I'm walking through London. Some parts of it are not the best. Yes, there's two options I've got. One, change the route and do something a bit more rural, but then I kind of like the idea of going from one place to another, from one RC shop to another, is I will actually walk with other people at certain points, and definitely would be walking through London in the daytime, in the middle of the daytime. That way it could be timed. But there was quite a few people who commented about I wouldn't go through there. So we'll see. But a few people have volunteered to come along at those sections of the route. So we'll see. But I'll just carry on in the background, and yeah, and I've got to lose a lot more weight because it's a lot more of a challenge than you might think. Another topic that popped up recently, which is quite a good one and a bit of a Pandora's box, as there's no real right or wrong to it, is the whole vintage versus replicas or re-releases and vintage racing, and what's vintage and what not. So that's a really good subject that you can debate till the cows come home. So just to go over, what is vintage racing? Well, if you take it at face value, you would say vintage racing is to race vintage cars. Well, vintage is old. So that means racing old cars. So should that be anything that's then new, or should it be everything that's produced back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s? Well, you would say yes. The problem with that is plastics age. What about the electronics? So you have to run period electronics. You can right now, might be quite expensive, but you could run vintage electronics. The problem is over time, those electronics will fail, and then there's no new ones because you've got to run vintage. But then how far do you take it? Do you say, well, the bodies have to be vintage? Do the tyres have to be vintage? Do the rims have to be vintage? The electronics, the motors. The motors, you probably could say, well, you have to run brushed motors, but then you could say, well, you have to run vintage motors. And I think there's probably enough still around that you can maintain. So you could say yes to the motors, but then batteries, you know, running old NIMHs, some of those batteries were very, very fragile back in the day anyway. So nowadays you've got to run lipos. Really, yes, you can get some very basic NIMHs. So could you say, oh, we only run NIMH? So that's a bit of a can of worms, especially the batteries and the electronics. So really, you've got to find that fine line between running vintage and running reproductions, if you will. Now, there's a lot of debates about the YZ10R. So here is a original one, and here is a YZ10R. So if you look at them, they're very close, and if you take the bodies off, they're very close underneath. The fronts you can see. So the changes that have been made are the materials, thicknesses, and slight changes for more modern shocks and stuff like that. So at what point is this not okay compared to the original versus, well, just run a modern buggy with an older body on it? So there's a lot of that aspect to it. This is a fully qualified vintage buggy. This runs in the Iconic Cup and all that kind of stuff, and it's been scrutineered and it passes all scrutineering, and apparently this is probably the most scrutineered car so far on the track, because the other side of it, which is really interesting to debate, you take a vintage buggy and how much of it can you modify and change? Could I take the arms off of this one and the shocks off this one and put it on this one? Is that still vintage? So yeah, it can be a bit of a grey area for sure, and a really interesting one. And a lot of you comment, some people comment very much that vintage is vintage. Then someone mentioned something about, well, it's a reproduction. It's probably a slightly better way to call it, a reproduction versus a vintage, because when I say go vintage racing, well, I'd say that's vintage racing, but then other people would say no, that's not vintage racing. And then how much of a car do you change before it stops being an original one? Classic example is my Triggers broom, my Cougar. I've changed 98% of the parts on that car. but is it still a Cougar even? As a lot of them are aftermarket parts, but really the chassis is all carbon fibre, but it kind of resembles the same shape as the original ones back in the day. But the ones back in the day didn't have carbon chassis, did they? So there you go, an interesting one. So comment below, let me know what your take on it is. Personally, I take my hat off to all the people that run vintage and trying to set the rules. It must be an absolute nightmare of trying to make a very well organized, fair event with a lot of people have different opinions on what's vintage and what's not. Also, vintage changes every year. It gets another year older, another year older. Now, currently, you can run in 2024, if you go into the Iconic, for instance, 2004 is the cutoff for the most modern vintage buggies. So you can run anything between 1983 and 2004. That's still 20 years ago. So is a buggy from 2004 vintage? Well, being that it's 20 years old, you kind of got to say yes. Anyway, just some things to chat about. Thanks so much. See you on the next one. Take it easy. Bye-bye.